So, England won the deciding test against Australia on the Rugby Summer Tour. Let's look at how the England rugby team are building towards the Rugby World Cup in 2023. So, following the Test Series victory over Australia, I want to take a step back and look at what have we learned from England and how are they building towards the Rugby World Cup in 2023. I want to do a kind of performance school report for the team, looking at highlighting the things that went well and that we can build on, and maybe the things that they need to look at going forwards and things that perhaps as a fan we need to be concerned at or would hope to see improvement in the autumn. So I think the thing that really, for me, the biggest thing was actually captured in that last 5 minutes of the third test. In the 75th minute, England went 18 phases where they defended. Now, there's been a lot of reports in the media and from players, the fact that showed a togetherness, a cohesion, that they were going to the well. I think that phrase has been used a lot. And I mean, I absolutely agree. However, I always think that an England team over the last couple of seasons have been able to do that, been well drilled defensively, both at international level and from their club level. And have always felt like they could kind of stop a team going through. But what I think highlighted to me was the patience that had. I think England teams over the last few years would have committed offence there, been penalised, done something stupid, so not taking their opportunity. And I think actually what it highlighted was a patience, an understanding of trusting their teammates. And it was then about after 18 phases that Luke Cowan-Dickie struck. He went over the ball, we won the ball and got a turnover. And I think, to be honest, that is just trusting the system, trusting your individual players, but having that patience. And that may come down to fitness, or it may just come down to a belief. But to me, that being able to go through those phases and deal that patience is a really good thing. And I think that's a championship winning team formula. So I think the patience is a real benefit and a bonus for me. I think the other thing which was kind of reported in the media was Eddie Jones going back to his kind of ruthlessness, pulling Kerr off at 35 minutes and replacing him with Jack Van Poortvliet. I feel sorry for Danny Kerr, and I do think that it reflected the way the game was being played, and perhaps Jack Van Poortvliet was better suited the way the game was suiting. I've seen someone else compare Eddie Jones to Jose Mourinho in football. I think that Mourinho equally would make big decisions early on, particularly in his coaching career. And then as he was established in a team, he did that less and less, similar to Eddie Jones. I actually think that that's a skill for a coach to be able to do that earlier on. I think every time England have done that, that's actually gone on to make the team improve in their performance. And I think similar in football. I think Mourinho has done that. It's worked in his favour. And I think that the important thing is that Jones doesn't lose that we bring on substitutes a bit earlier, because I think sometimes we haven't used our bench enough sooner. And I think sometimes, having the right players on the bench and then bringing them on suit the game. And that shouldn't be a reflection on the player. So I don't think it should necessarily reflect negatively on Danny Kerr, which I think it is at the moment. I think it should just be about using those players depending on how the game's being played and how the opposition are dealing with the game and maybe how the referee is refereeing the game. So I think that can, I'd like to see more of that going forward and that become a feature and not be an anomaly almost and a bit rare. And then the other thing I think which has been reported is I think the forward dominance throughout the series has been good, particularly in that first half of the second test. I think if we can see more of that, England winning collisions with ball in hand. But I think it's more than just taking the ball up hard. It's using the footwork at the line. I think Billy Vunipola, a big guy, can do that. And I think that's actually quite effective. I think we saw in some of the other test series, Ireland were very effective at doing that. And I think that buys you a bit of time and it allows that ball to come back quicker. So I think it's about, taking the ball up hard, but also using that footwork. So you're not just taking man to man, you're actually trying to break the line. I think in terms of some of the negatives, unfortunately, I think one of the things is still around the game plan. I think England are guilty of trying to select complexity over variation. And I think they're different. I think they're perhaps trying to look at the same thing. I think they particularly in that first test, there was a lot of complex manoeuvres, feeding Marcus Smith into the pocket, Ford Farrell just not really working. And I think that the problem is, especially if you're bringing players in, if you increase the complexity, it just makes it very difficult to integrate people in and out. And that may be to do with selection based on performance or injury, as we've seen across both teams in the series. So I think that, but on the other hand, I think that England still don't have, in the third test, they tried to move the ball laterally, but it was again quite predictable. There was no variation. There was no use of the short side, for instance. I think that on time we did use it when we went to Freddie Stewart, we did score, but there was no use of that maybe in the sort of middle third of the field, where I think we can actually potentially be quite effective. I think also in that third test, what we're looking to do is push the ball wide too early. So there was a couple of opportunities where Tommy Freeman got an overlap, but I don't think it's a true overlap. It's an overlap where you beat that last defender, but actually just because you haven't sucked the players and done the hard work initially, you've got a lot of covering players coming across, hence why I didn't really go away. Whereas if you watch other teams, they actually create an overlap where that player literally has just field to run into. And I think that's what we need to be trying to strive for. So I think there needs to be something more. It needs to be a simple variation rather than complex variation. And I think the other thing is just, I felt a lot of lack of angles. Again, we're trying to move wide quickly. There's no one cutting angles, either whether that's decoy runners or whether that's hitting angles to, take the ball through the line. I still think England are lacking that. And I would, we've got players who could do that and probably do that for their clubs. And I would like to see England being able to utilise that a little bit more effectively. Now, I don't think it requires a big person. I think there's this perception you have to have a Tuolangi or a Cock and a Singer to run those lines. I disagree. I think if you get the right player running the right lines and you're looking for that, I think you can do that all day. And that could be any of the players, to be honest. But you'd want to see that particularly from the back line. I think linked to that perhaps as well, I still think there's perhaps a little bit of lack of pace out wide. I think there's a few examples where I think both Jack Noel and Tommy Freeman had good series and probably are possibly your wingers going forwards, despite some of the people coming back. But I still think they lack that overall speed. So if we are getting the ball, we are getting those kind of half overlaps. They haven't probably got the raw speed to sort of make that a dangerous attacking position, because the cover of defence is always going to be coming across. Last thing was, one of the things that highlighted in another video was still England's lack of use of the penalty advantage. So I saw it again in the third test. It probably wasn't as noticeable because I don't think England were necessarily, if they were looking to sort of attack a bit more. But I think that when they get the advantage, there's no urgency, and then there seems to be a lack of clarity about what we're going to do with that. Now, I think that the best teams in the world kind of know what they want to do with that penalty advantage, whether it's go wide, kick to the corner. And I think that there's definitely with Smith, there's an opportunity there for him to sort of really benefit from that. And I'd like to see England use that a little bit more, because I feel like that's a bit of a weapon, given the amount of advantage referees give these days. I think you can it's a free hit, and I don't think we're using it effectively enough. And looking ahead at the autumn internationals and my team to start against Argentina on the 6th of November, to be honest, I wouldn't be that radical in terms of changes. I think really we're not far. We'll be a year out from the World Cup by then, and I think we need to stick with combinations and squad members. But I think that I think we'll be looking to bring back Sickler. I think he's still probably number one in that position. Obviously, bring back Itoje into the second row. As I've talked about on this video before, I'd still like to see Courtney Lawes playing in the second row. The ability for that is it just gives us an advantage where we've got an abundance of good players in the back row and maybe a bit better balance. So bring in someone like a Jack Willis. I've talked about him a number of times, but I'd like to see him have a number of games stringed together and complement him with Curry. Perhaps stick with Vunipola at number 8. I think you can't look beyond JVP at the moment at scrum half. And then probably I would be looking to change 13. You're probably looking at Slade coming back. Although let's not lose Marchant. I mean, I feel like he's got credit in the bank, and I don't know what's happened on this tour for him to be demoted from the squad completely. And then I think I would still think, as I touched on earlier in the video, we'd still probably lack raw pace out wide. And I think Anthony Watson is still perhaps the man to come in. I think Tommy Freeman has performed very well. He would definitely be in my squad, and he'd probably cover that fullback position and wing position. I think he's moved in as that prime position, probably ahead of maybe Daly and Mayland. But Anthony Watson is just he's a class above. You know, he's a two-tall Test lion. He's going to be playing with Leicester this year, so he'll be competing in both in Europe and within the Premiership. And I think that he could really push his game on. So I'll definitely look to bring him back. I think the other thing that I would say, I won't go into the bench now, but I mean, because the bench could be made up of many people, but I would really like to see that they don't remove Danny Care. As I touched on earlier, I think the ruthlessness is really key for England. And I think Eddie Jones's ability to make changes early is good, but I don't think that should be held against the player. I think that should become the norm. It should become, well, the game's going that way. We need to make a change. Not that player's not playing, but perhaps this other player is better fit for the way the game's being played. And I think that, again, Danny Care has been in form for a number of years. He's got a lot of experience. And I feel like the work that he's doing behind the scenes with the younger players is really important. And I would like to see him probably in there, probably even ahead of Youngs, just given his slightly different sort of his way of playing is perhaps different to Jack Van Poortvliet. I think if we have a Youngs and Jack Van Poortvliet, we've just got a like for like. And I think having that variation is important as we go forward. So they're my thoughts about how England build towards the Rugby World Cup in 2023. I'd be interested to see your comments. We'll be doing more videos around this, and obviously towards that autumn internationals, we'll probably have a clearer idea of who's in the squad and who's actually likely to be in the team, and maybe who's in form, who's in injuries. We'll also be looking at kind of work about what's happening beyond the World Cup, looking at the coaching setup, how we're playing, and perhaps even some of the details around captaincy and the likes. So thank you for listening, and look out for the next video.